Okay, so it's 6 PM. We'll call the November meeting to order. Tessa?
I have an amendment to the agenda. I would like to make a motion to add a line item for farmland protection discussion or land protection discussion with Andy Smith and Tim Donald.
Second.
Second.
Discussion on that? Motion by Tessa, second by me to add Mr. Donald and Mr. Smith. A motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. Okay. All right. We will proceed with the moment of silence, and then Mr. Whiten will give the invocation. Let's have a moment of silence, please. Mr. Charlie.
Dear Lord, as we come to you tonight, we're so thankful, Lord, again to come into your presence, Lord, to ask you to help our farmers, help agriculture in this county and in this state, and in this whole country that we live in, Lord. We just thank you and praise you and honor you. We look to you for all of our needs. Help us, lead, guide, and direct us during this meeting that we can make the best decisions for the farmers and in agriculture in this county. Be with our leaders, be with our president, the United States, and the Congress. Lord, just touch them and lead them in the way you'd have them to go. In the name of Jesus, I pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Charlie. All right. Pledge. Attention, salute.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right. Let's look at the minutes. I see one small error. Mr. Rothel's first name's Daniel. And that's the only thing I noticed. So make a motion to amend Mr. Rothel's name from David to Daniel.
Make a motion, accept.
Okay. Motion and a second on that.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes with the amendment.
Second.
Okay, might need to vote on the first one first, and then,
We vote separately? Can we vote
Yeah.
incorporate?
Vote it separately since we already made the motion. That's fine.
yeah, okay, all in favor of making it Daniel Rothel, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, now, yours,
I make a motion to accept the minutes with the amendment.
second.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Thank you, Tessa. So, we can, there's no public comment other than what we're about to discuss, but, so we can move on to the calendar. We'll look at the calendar right quick.
So the only thing on here is your May, meeting. So originally it would be on May 11th. Typically you would move it to that Thursday, but there is a conflict. I believe it might be early voting potentially. is the 14th. This room is available on Tuesday, the 12th, May 12th.
This is still following the second Monday of each month.
Yes.
Do we need to vote on that separate? One date, or can we do it?
You want to, vote to change the May meeting to the 12th, and then vote to approve the,
Calendar.
sorry, yes, thank you, calendar. Look at those minutes. Vote to approve the calendar with the May meeting being on the 12th.
Fine.
Somebody has, I can't make that.
I can't, I make the motion.
The motion is to change the May meeting to the 12th.
And that's on a Tuesday.
I'll second that motion.
Okay. Motion to move to the 12th of May, 2026, and the second. Any further discussion on that? I think that suits everybody. Everybody in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank y'all. Next is farmland protection.
I'll make a motion to approve the calendar.
Oh, okay.
The whole calendar.
Thank you.
With the May,
Yep.
amended date.
Do you need a second, or
Need
you
a
got
second.
Charlie?
Yeah.
I'll make a second.
That's good point, Tessa. Motion and a second to approve the calendar as amended. So we're good on the dates. Calendar doesn't go out that far anyway. It's fine. It's a long way away. But any other discussion? Okay, hearing none, we'll just, all those in favor of approving the calendar, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. All right. Next item is farmland protection and land protection. Thank y'all for coming, and, ma'am,
Mr. Chairman, I have a suggestion, actually, it's a point of order. In order for us to have speakers on the floor, the agenda does not reflect those speakers. So I would like to motion to amend the agenda before we start for farmland protection to include comments from Mr. Andy Smith, as he's been asked to attend, and from Mr. Tim Donald. That way, y'all have already done.
You're so
okay.
good,
It's
but
all
that
right.
is,
It's okay.
you know, yeah.
great
you know
minds
what
think
you're
alike.
about.
We-
Well, you've got to
Yeah.
amend the agenda.
So we
because
did,
yeah.
after the call to order, we amended it just how you were gonna do
So how is it amended now?
it. It's a land protection discussion with Andy Smith and Tim Donald.
Okay. And the other thing that I was going to bring, but I can bring it up later, is fine. That's fine. I'll leave it with that. I would like to table an item because of everything that has happened in our county.
Okay.
And I just think it's appropriate to do so.
Okay.
But I'll bring that up at the time.
Is that with the attorney?
No,
Okay.
has nothing to do with that.
Well, we discussed a little bit before the meeting, David, since you had found this land discrepancy issue with the Conservation Bank, if you would like to kind of present that to Mr. Smith and since he was on the board at the time, he should be able to clear up the issue with the 60,000 that was given to the easement, and then the return of the money and the delay on that, and the issue with the land changing, the easement changing on the land.
Okay. Let me get my thoughts about that.
Okay.
It's been a month ago since we talked about it. You're Mr. Smith, is that correct?
That's right.
You're an attorney, real estate
That's
attorney?
correct. Yep.
Okay,
And I was chair of the Conservation Bank Board during that time.
okay. Our, Mr. Blanton, our chairman, he, last meeting, well, past two meetings, he has stressed to this body that we should promote and support easements. So I like to learn and research before I say I'm gonna support something. So I've been doing a lot of reading and researching and everything, and I've told this body before, and I'd say it to anybody, my concern is all farmers. Whether you farm 50 acres or 5,000 acres, I'm concerned about every farmer in this county. And I know there's only so much money in a conservation bank, and in my mind, how does that help every farmer? I've said it 100 times, conservation easements, I'm not against them, but I want to understand them. And I'm up here to try to help the little farmer and the big farmer. That's what my focus is. But my questions was, there's an ordinance that, the county has to follow the rules when you apply for a grant for a conservation easement. And I know I've got notes here. Let's see. Okay, here's some right here. There's a piece of property up in Mountain Rest that was, and a man applied for a grant application for an easement, conservation easement, but he's gonna sell the whole land. But the grant application, one of the rules and stipulations is if you're gonna use conservation bank money, it's supposed to be in an easement attached to it. Is that correct?
That changed over time, and I'm Andrew Smith from Mountain Rest. That changed over time. When the ordinance was first written, there were two types of projects that could come to the conservation bank. One for a private landowner wanting to put a conservation easement on the property. The other for a private landowner wanting to sell the property in fee simple to essentially a land trust or something like that. So there are two ways that you could get a grant to help conserve the property, whether it's farmland or forest land or scenic value land. And so that was originally how it was. And that's how I think the property you're talking about, the 154 acres, it was in the state of William Lyles.
Yes.
Yeah. So when it came, it was before the ordinance changed to where now you have to put a conservation easement on it to get a grant. But before you didn't. You could do it fee simple, just sell it outright. And so they came with a proposal to have the sale be to the Natural Land Trust outright, the whole 154 acres. I think it was $661,000. And our rule was we didn't give grants for more than 10% of the value of the conserved interest in land. So our grant to them was for $66,100. And that was so the Natural Land Trust could buy the land, and they had expressed the intention that they were gonna, and this is what they routinely do, they'll buy the land that they deem as good conservation land with the intent of selling it to generally a public entity. Could be South Carolina Natural Resources, could be Forest Service, could be whoever. This was adjoining Sumter National Forest, so their intent was to sell it to Sumter National Forest. They were essentially gonna buy it, hold it, sell it. So it would be conserved as, public resource land. And so in our thinking on the board, when you put a conservation easement on property, that really spells out what you can and can't do with it. When you do the fee simple, you're kind of operating on trust. You're the Natural Land Trust, you're gonna sell it to the Forest Service, it'll be conserved. So we put a deed language in the deed. We required them to put it in there that they would, whoever had the land down the line had to meet the standards of the Conservation Bank. in the future. So the deal was done, it closed, the property was sold, and the Natural Land Trust negotiated, and we weren't a part of all this, our job was done. For, seemed like years with the Forest Service about the purchase, and the Forest Service finally said, we can't buy a piece of property that has any restrictive language like that in it, so the deal's off. And so they came back to us, the Natural Land Trust, and said, we gotta go back to square one. And so what we wanna do as the Natural Land Trust, we wanna give that money back to you because we can't, we can't go forward with it like we intended to do. And so, we'd never had that issue before, and so we said, well, okay, we'll take the money back, you know, and you know, it's your land, you do with what you want to, we're not involved anymore, and we actually made them, because we didn't have that $66,000 in our bank, making interest, we requested that they pay us interest for the time that wasn't in there, which they did. They paid us $70,000, you know, instead of $66,000. And essentially, that's what happened. There never was a conservation easement on that property, and there never was, once it got going, an intent to put a conservation easement on that property.
Okay. 'Cause
It was a weird situation,
Yeah.
and
it blew my mind when I got to reading it.
yeah, it was, yeah. And there were a lot of other kind of tangential issues about it, that were,
Well, see, wasn't it in November of 2020 that, Upstate Forever wrote y'all a letter asking to remove the easement and the conservation easement restriction?
on that property?
Yes.
There never was and never has been a conservation easement on that property.
But, well, there was in December 29th of 2020, it said it was recorded, the deed, there was an easement on it.
I'd need to see that, but I don't
Got a
believe
copy of it
that's,
here.
I don't believe that's,
I got a copy of it.
okay.
It was recorded December the 29th. See, that's the rescission and here it is right here. Right there. And at the bottom.
Right. You mean right here?
It says it's subject to the provisions.
Okay, so that's what I'm saying. So a conservation easement, I mean, physically is like this is a document with maybe 25 pages or so. You know, it's a legal document. This is a deed.
Yeah.
And this is the exact deed I was talking about. The deed, since it doesn't have a conservation easement, we required them to put this language in there that it had to comply with the provisions of our ordinance. But it's not a conservation easement. It's just deed language, and that's what tripped up the Forest Service. That's why they had to give the money back to us, is because Forest Service wouldn't buy it with that.
But it says right here, it shall be permanently protected for conservation purposes.
That's correct.
Is that subject to 2-398 through 2-409? And those ordinance says you gotta go through a big ordeal to get the
Yeah.
easement off. I mean, you gotta
Well,
go.
but that's not an easement. I'm just, as a lawyer, I'm telling you that, if that was a conservation easement, the top of the document would say, instead of saying, titled real estate, it would say conservation easement. And so this is a general warranty deed that has deed restrictive language in it, not a conservation easement.
Yeah, and you're an attorney, I'm just trying to learn here, okay? But 8 days later, there was a rescission of the grant agreement.
That's right, of the grant agreement, not conservation easement, grant agreement. So when we gave grants to grantees, to people that came to us for grants, we had a grant agreement with them that, you know, just set out the parameters of the entire agreement. but it wasn't they followed our procedures and all that sort of stuff, who the grantee was, et cetera, how much it was for, those kind of things, but that's also not a conservation easement.
So, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So the Conservation Bank Board does not issue funds for conservation easements? Y'all issue funds
No,
for
no.
grants, or both?
The
We issue-
grants are the funds they
Yeah,
issue.
we issue grants, which are funds, dollars, for conservation easements and for fee simple purchases. But, and like I said, originally, it could be a fee simple purchase, like that was, without a conservation easement, like that was. But we changed that rule to where they all have to have conservation easements now. So
Well-
that's what we give grants for, yes, ma'am.
Okay, so my point was, if the Conservation Bank Board is giving grants for fee simple purchases and not conservation easements, my question was, does that not defeat the purpose? But y'all have rectified that in the ordinance then, and codified it to where if you get money from the Conservation Bank Board, it will have a conservation easement on it. Is that correct?
Yeah, we thought it was stronger that way, and that's, yeah. I mean, the problem was, I mean, the Natural Land Trust is a good organization, been here for decades, do good conservation work. We trust their work and that they're gonna do what they say they're gonna do in their application, which was transfer it to the Forest Service. Didn't need a conservation easement, because it was gonna be public land.
And I guess our question as an Ag Advisory Board, now that we've kind of learned some of that history, there was also a buyer that would have kept that in a farmland. And I guess my question is, how much weight would the board have given that grant had they known that there was actual, and I think that particular farmer was willing to put some conservation restrictions on it,
Right.
but not to the point of being told, you can't do this, you can't do that. I think there would have needed to be some negotiations. And from an Ag Advisory Board perspective, personally, I would rather have seen that land go to a farmer who is going to re-fence the land, redo the pastures, keep it as a working farm in 154 acres, than back to forestry, where it's going to be managed as timber, whatever. But my question is, do y'all have a grading system to where if I wanted to purchase Tessa's farm and it's bordering Sumter National Forest, and Nature Land Trust says, well, we're going to give you this, and we want it to go to National Forest, and I wanted to farm it, would there be a weight system? Do y'all take that in consideration?
We do take that into consideration, and I'm kind of with you. I live around the corner from that, and I would prefer for that piece of property to stay in a farm because it's beautiful.
And that's my point. It could have been, but I think there was so many mistruths, no offense to Nature Land Trust, but they were driving the bus.
Yeah.
And that fell through the cracks. So my point is, I think there has to be some mechanism in place to where, because we're losing farmland, and that's one of them we've lost. You know, I think it was stated this morning, every 14 minutes, we lose another acre of farmland in our country. And the conservation easements that Farm Bureau is enacting are to keep it in farmland. And I know that we have two different entities, and we have two different agendas, and I get that. But if we're truly trying to conserve farmland, then, like, Tim, please correct me if I'm wrong, their easements state farming and agricultural use, and it's got to remain in that type of thing for it to be farmland. And I think it's just disheartening to see an entity like Nature Land Trust or somebody else that's not a local resident purchase the land and then try to put it in public land. I mean, I get that, and I just wonder if that's not part of, or if this ever came up, 30 by 30. because that's what it feels like and sounds like, where 30% of all lands in America will be public lands, because that's what it feels like they're trying to do. And I would rather, like you said, see it in a farmer's hand as opposed to 30 by 30.
Yeah, I'm with you 100% there. I agree wholeheartedly. I really do. And, you know, one of the things that happens in these is that when there's a transition period, like when this person died, there's often a threat of, you know, if we want to develop it or whatever. And a lot of times entities come and swoop in there to prevent it from being developed. And, you know, I think that may have been an issue there. But, you know, we support what the Farm Bureau Land Trust does 100%. And I do want to clarify, I'm not on the Conservation Bank Board anymore. I termed out. I'm just speaking from the experience from back then.
Right, well, and thank you for that, but I do think, you know, that, I don't know what we can do as a board, but if we're gonna have anything to say with, I think it's ultimately personally up to the individual landowner, what they choose to do with their property. I don't think any government entity should tell them what to do. If they choose to put it there, then that's it. Us providing the mechanisms and the tools, I think, is crucial. But I also think, just like with what we're learning, or I'm learning, I'll be the first to say, from Mr. Smith, I would have thought ag would carry you know, we would rate number 1 on the scale, and maybe going to forestry would rate number 5. I'm just saying, there's a big difference, and there's a big difference in land use with that. But I think a lot of questions have been cleared up. But I do believe with Farm Bureau, their state, it has to be agriculture to preserve farmland in America. I think that is their ultimate goal, because it's a national, we have a state organization, but it's a national organization. And I think as a national organization, they do realize it, and that's what they're fighting for. But as easy as, like he said, it wasn't a conservation easement, it was just in the deed, and Nature Land Trust really kind of lost my trust because of how they handled it. To me, it just should not have been handled that way. I think that's the problem that David found, is it wasn't whether or not it was legal or not legal or this or that or the other. It's more, maybe in a lawyer's terms, unethical. Maybe it didn't turn out the way, it just, all the cards wasn't on the table and everybody couldn't see everybody's hand at the same time. And I think that's where Charlie was saying he knows exactly where his is. And he was talking about that. He couldn't understand why there was not the 25 pages that he had to go through, because they didn't officially put the full conservation easement on the property, which made it easier then for them to pull it back and do what they've done. But now we're 5 years in, 2019, 20, 2025, almost 26. And basically we've had 154 acres that could be being farmed and into a beautiful farm sitting in the corner of our county. Like he said, he lives around the corner. So just food for thought, and
Who owns the land now?
nature.
I think the Nature Land Trust does.
It's not had anything.
Yeah, and I probably haven't heard in a year where they are in negotiations with the Forest Service, what the deal is. They do hold some of their properties as preserves or reserves, but generally they transfer them, but I'm not sure what's happening with this one. But it's still being farmed by the Robins just down the road, which I'm thankful for.
So maybe Robbins could work out a deal with Nature Land Trust. Maybe.
There's a little bit of backstory on that this comes from the National Land Trust. They kind of put out, this is what we do, and they raise their funds. And they were approached, I think, by Trent Smith to buy that, for him to buy it. I think, and even put a conservation easement on it and put a house on it. And I think that was the sticking issue for the Natural Land Trust, is that that's not what we promised our donors we would do with it. And again, for the Conservation Bank, we just took grant applications as they came to us, you know.
And I understand that,
Yeah.
but I also would say to Nature Land Trust, I understand that's what you tell your donors, but you have a unique piece of property here that we would like to see remain in agriculture, and as
Yeah.
crucial as farmland is, I think maybe there needs to be an exception to your rule. And let's look at seeing if we can't put 150, I know the Robins are still doing it, but Nature Land Trust is not gonna allow it if they're not gonna allow a house or what. I mean, there's not gonna be many farmers that's gonna buy that.
Right.
I
Be a
mean,
good solution.
but I think you need to amend your rules, and as crucial as farmland is in America right now, how about let's put it back on the block and let's see if we can make a deal.
Never can tell about that.
No,
Kim, the grant application, the way I read it, the owner of the land at the time, which was Mr. Lyles, signed something that said, I agree that my land will be in a conservation easement as per the sale.
right.
But somewhere that got changed. And, I mean, if chairman's wanting us to support conservation easements, then something shouldn't change. If you put down on your application that you understand this is gonna be in a conservation easement,
Right.
and then something happened during those months of transitioning that now it's not in an easement, I kinda got lost in all the paperwork and all that.
It sounds like the paperwork didn't go all together with the deed. It sounds like that 25-page easement didn't get attached to that deed.
Well, it never got created, and that project was somewhat confusing from the get-go, because it was Upstate Forever with the Natural Land Trust, and Upstate Forever, that's what they do, is conservation easements.
Yeah.
And then at some point, Upstate Forever peeled off, and it was just Natural Land Trust, and there may have been an amendment to the application, or I'm not sure, but the understanding changed from it going to a conservation easement to a fee simple purchase.
Well, and to add more confusion, there was a letter sent, a ratification letter sent, stating that the Forest Service wanted to buy it. And that agreement to buy it was attached to the original grant application. But if the Forestry Service requires, that says we will not buy any land with any easements or restrictions on it, wouldn't that have made the original grant application null and void?
Well, it
If-
would have made it a mess, which I think
Yeah,
it ended up
Because
being.
there's a letter that said that we have attached the letter that the Forestry Service wants it to the original grant application. But the grant application says you can't get conservation easement money unless there is an easement on it. It's conflicting.
Yeah. I don't think I can clear that up for you.
Yeah.
I know how it eventually evolved into the fee simple only. And just showing you, just that little bit of language in there, which is not a conservation easement, that tripped the Forest Service up.
So if me being on this board, if a farmer comes up to me and says, David, I'm thinking about an easement, tell me about it. So what do I tell him? Just based on this, are you saying that in the
Yeah, I
future?
agree.
I'd say
In the
go to-
future, you're saying that the rules have changed now, to make everything simple. Is that what you're telling me? The
Yes.
ordinances have changed, the amendments?
Yeah,
in
and
the
there
ordinance?
was a huge change to the ordinance earlier this year by the council.
He's talking about the conservation bank. This is where the money is coming from. They're not a land trust. So they're not actually creating the easements for the land. That would be something that the Farm Bureau would be doing, is drawing up that, helping with the easement process. Am I right?
That's right. And so if you wanted to come get well, it's confusing because the ordinance has been changed. There was huge public comments on it earlier this year. So it's very different now, what you can do with the conservation bank money. But if you want to do permanent conservation and get a grant from the conservation bank, you've got to agree to put a conservation easement on your property. So the Farm Bureau Land Trust could come to the conservation bank.
Yeah.
You know, and I assume they will, if it has any funds in there, which I don't think it does anymore, you know, to get a grant to help them get a conservation easement on farmland, yes.
Okay.
So the ordinance that was changed, this ordinance has changed now twice. There was an original ordinance that when you were there was changed
Yeah,
to make it, instead of a fee simple or a conservation easement, just conservation easement.
that's correct.
You only got the money if you were for sure, if you had a conservation easement on the land.
Because that's the only way we could really guarantee that it was gonna be conserved throughout time.
So it went way stricter on where the money was gonna go. And this most recent ordinance, I've got a mint in my mouth, I'm sorry. The most recent ordinance opened it up a lot and expanded it into, we really don't know, the money could be used for anything that falls under a category that might include docks at parks or cleanup projects or different things. So it's expanded a lot now. Our county conservation bank specifically. So the money, it's just what the money is going to. That's all you were deciding is where the money, who was gonna get the money.
Yeah, whether to approve an application and give a grant.
And now it's kind of a moot point because the ordinance is so expanded at this point. What our discussion has been, but we were referring to something that happened in the past under the strict ordinance.
Kind of under the original.
Under the original ordinance,
Inception
the
of
less strict, I guess, the first ordinance. That was what we were just discussing.
So, with that being said, the bank was established in 2012,
Right.
correct? And that was done in 2020, correct? 2019, 2020?
This project?
That project.
That's right.
So basically then, not to any fault of the bank's board, and that's not what I'm saying, but because of that, we could have other properties that were fee simple, which is deed restriction language, and not full conservation easements on them.
That is correct. And I mean, there's probably 10 grants or so that the bank approved. And I would say maybe three of those are fee simple and the rest of them are conservation easements.
That kind of answers it. So this could arise in the future again, where it's just kind of, it gets changed and without whatever, but like David said, they check off that they're putting it, but then it's not technically there because, and not to muddy the waters, or I'm not here to throw stones or rocks at anybody, but I think at that point, it's not the OCCB that was the issue. I think we're going back to Upstate Forever and Nature Land Trust should have been forthcoming in what they were doing originally to
Yeah.
start with.
It was very unclear.
Yes, I think that's
But,
what,
I mean, it did clear up to where, oh, it's just gonna be a fee simple, and we do that, so.
so y'all went ahead and went through with it. But like you said, that little language there tripped up forestry.
That's right.
And I guess in a way, thankfully it did, for the simple fact, now we kind of know what the whole intent was to start with.
Yeah.
And that kind of makes it there, but then it takes us back to the question David had of, that guy checked the box that it was going in an easement, and in reality, that wasn't what was happening.
Right.
I think that's the confusion, and the
Yeah.
reason it's hard to say, yeah, you go put your land in the conservation easement, Mr. Smith, nobody's gonna touch it. But then you have actors, bad actors sometimes, and they go do this, and then here we are.
You're right.
So,
Well, maybe that's some of the language that's been cleared up in the ordinance, because the use of funds in the ordinance now says that in order to get rid of an easement, let's just say somebody wanted to get rid of the conservation easement, it has to be approved by the OCCB. It has to be approved by county council. It has to, another condition is if the land became beyond conserving.
Right.
Something happened, eminent domain or whatever, and The other thing that would have to pass is the Court of Common Pleas would have to approve it.
Right.
Was the Court of Common Pleas approved to get rid of the?
I
or to
think
take
that language was put in there, and that was put in there before my time, just to make it almost impossible for
Yeah.
you to go through a process to.
Well, this is what the language currently says. I
No,
pulled
I
it off.
understand, but it's just been there for a long time is what I'm saying. Yeah.
So did the Court of Common Pleas approve?
So there never was a conservation easement on there, so you didn't have to go through that process.
Okay.
So y'all changed that after that application came through?
No, that
No,
was in the original
It's
ordinance.
always there.
But
Yeah,
because
I
there
mean,
was no.
I think the
easement.
confusion is that you think there was a conservation easement on the property and there never was one. It was just that language.
But in 2019, the OCCB approved funds because there was gonna be a conservation.
No, that's incorrect. We gave a grant for the fee simple purchase of the property with that deed language.
Okay, yeah, I guess I'm confused about that then.
Yeah.
But the grant application.
I understand, so the grant application was confused,
Yeah.
and then it clarified into, oh, this is just a fee simple application, which we approved, and we gave a grant for the fee simple purchase without a conservation easement, which occurred.
So that's why there's a rescission of the deed 8 days later. That's taken off that paragraph that I showed you in the original deed. Took it off.
You mean in the grant agreement or in the?
No, there was a rescission at the Register of Deeds, taking off that paragraph I showed you in the original deed. It says this is subject to
It took that language off?
yeah,
Oh,
It
that's,
says-
yeah, I'd love to see that.
yeah. Let me find it here.
Is that, I don't know.
Right here, it says because there was that language in the original deed.
Okay, so what's the date of that?
This was December the 29th, and that one was January the 8th of 2021, about 8 days later.
This is recorded 2023.
I've given you the wrong one, have I not? Let's see here.
So this is what they did to correct, so when the Forest Service told them they can't take that language, 3 years later, they came and changed it
Changed
to
it.
take that language out. Yeah.
Okay, but, so was it a mistake to put this on here?
No, we thought it was a good idea because that was the only way we could have sort of assurance that they would comply with what our intent was in conservation.
They being. the
Whoever owned it.
Whoever
And-
owned it next.
Yeah, and next, and next, and next.
Okay.
And that's what the Forest Service couldn't take, and that's why they did that rescission 3 or 4 years later.
Well, that would, an attorney would get his pay trying to figure this out that land's ever sold, wouldn't he?
Gotta make a living.
Golly. Is that a bit of a period, like a 3-year period?
Oh, no, it wasn't. It was, I mean, that was all after we gave the grant, they did it, and whenever it was 2020. 3 years later, they come to us and say, we can't do it. And we didn't, that was just all them, and that's what led to that. So they came back to us and said, we finally get into an agreement with the Forest Service, but they don't want that language in there. And since they don't want that language in there, we want to give you your grant back. And so we had to talk to Mr. Root and everything and say, can we take money back? And they gave us the money back, and then they rescinded that language.
And they still haven't sold the land.
And they what?
And they still haven't sold it.
I really don't know. I don't think they have.
No, they haven't.
And yeah, it was, like I said, I wish it had to just
Stayed
stay
farmland.
farmland the whole time, yeah.
Because, and I had sent this to Rude, and he had answered my question, that we can do private trust and just involve attorneys and set it up for a family trust to protect our farmland and put all the language we need to put in our deeds for deed restriction. Unless, and then it's preserved that way.
Right.
Because it's in there. And then the only way it can ever change is if that trust changes or if they dissolve it.
And I still really believe in conservation easements. I mean, I think, and it was just a mess, but generally they're very straightforward. And they run with the land throughout time. The language is there for everybody to see. It's very clear. And people can buy them with conservation easements on it because that's what they want. I still think it's a really great tool.
I think it is a tool in the toolbox.
Yeah.
Like I said, I don't think it's you personally or anything. I do think that we do have some trust that don't do everything exactly like they say. That gives our other trusts that do a bad rap and a bad taste. And when that happens, it's hard, once that trust is broken, it's hard to get that trust back. And that's why I do think that Farm Bureau and what they're doing, not just because it's not just South Carolina, it's nationwide organization, they have the attorneys to argue that point, to put things back where they need to be and to correct them. But, yeah.
I couldn't agree with you more. I love it that the Farm Bureau has a land trust.
I might be a little
It's one of the greatest
skeptical of a
things
couple
out
of the
there.
local ones that, because I understand they've been around for a long time. I understand they've done some good work
Oof.
with what
Yeah.
you say. But at the same time,
Wasn't a good match out there.
no. And here we are, sitting here with a farm that's being farmed, but knowing who wanted to purchase, it could be a great farm. And it would be a great asset to that corner of our county. Just saying. And we've lost that because,
Mr. Smith, there's I think 800 registered farms, am I correct, in Oconee County? And according to the census, something like that. My question is about, and it falls in line with the deed restrictions. If Mr. John Doe over here had 150 acres, and he wants to keep his, and it's a farm, and he wants to keep it farming, and he decides to put in his deed when he passes on to his heirs and successors that it is to remain farmland. He puts it in his will and also as an amendment to his deed. Okay, and let's just say the son or the daughter gets it and it farms it for a while, and then they decide they don't want to farm anymore. And a guy next door says, I want to buy your land, but I want to put a racetrack on it. Would that deed in there says that farm, it needs to stay farm, runs with the land in perpetuity? Wording is very important in a deed, is that correct?
Absolutely.
Would that person have a problem putting a racetrack on that property?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question. I think, the deed restrictions generally carry. My best legal guess would be that it would be a good restriction. And I would say too, a conservation easement would be a better way to do that.
But I agree with you, but in that aspect, but how are we gonna, how can we give 800 farmers a conservation easement? There's not enough money to do that.
And that's correct. And here's the reality though. Let's say there are 800, I think the max number you're ever gonna get is 80 of those would want to have conservation easements. It's really, in the bigger scheme of things, conservation easements are pretty rare. They don't happen. We all know that it's never gonna happen throughout. We've given out over 13 years, 7 grants or so for it.
Yeah.
It just doesn't happen that often.
That's why I'm saying,
So that'd be, I see what you're saying, that's a better way, because it'd be individual and you could do it.
yeah, $300 or $400 to pay an attorney to write up the legal wording and you're done.
Yeah.
You know, that's what I've been trying to preach is you can do some restrictions yourself. Deed restrictions, you can, you know. So if you can't, if there's no conservation easement money for you out there and it just doesn't work out for you for a conservation easement, you can do it yourself. I mean, you as an attorney, would you agree what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I'm not ready to say yes or no on that. I'd have to do some research. You'd have to pay me something to figure that out for you.
I got you.
It's a good idea, though.
You're a good attorney, I hear you.
But seriously, I'm about done attorneying, so,
But if
I
it
like
says
it
in
as an
the,
idea, yeah.
if it says in the deed, I want my property to remain farmland, and the next guy that comes along after I'm dead and gone, this used to say me, I want
I
it to remain
understand.
farmland.
Yeah,
and
and
it's
I'm
in
telling
my
you, I don't
deed.
know the answer to that, yeah. Wish I did.
Because I know there are some deeds that has saved some farms in this property, in this county. I know that for a fact because of the wording in a deed, an old wording in a deed from 50 years ago. I know a court case that was won
Right.
because of some wording in a deed.
Were they notarized, David?
A deed?
They were recorded.
Yeah, it's recorded at the Register of Deeds.
I mean, before,
What do you mean?
when he wrote up the original paper.
It was by an attorney and it was put in a deed, yeah.
And I think that's a really great idea, and I think with proper research on that, it's probably something that should be promoted. And y'all would be a good place to promote that.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying is a conservation easement is wonderful. I don't want anybody to get the confusion that I'm knocking conservation easements. I'm just saying that, what about the other farmers? There's not enough money to go around what if all 800 farmers in this county wanted to collect money from a conservation easement? It couldn't happen, right? It's not mathematically possible.
Yeah, right. That's correct.
So how else do you save your property
I think
for
it's
the
a great
next
idea.
generation?
Maybe y'all can assign Mr. Root to do some legal research on that.
I think he's quizzing you, so we just told him to come see you.
We're trying to promote conservation in whatever manner. We're trying to learn
I understand.
because we don't have the training, but we're trying to promote it. We want to give them the straight answers and the straight advice, so.
Absolutely.
Now, if Natural Land Trust holds the property now, which I guess they still have it.
Yeah.
Trust, okay. What if, Mr. Neighbor wanted to buy it and put it back into farming? Would he be able to negotiate with the Natural Land Trust to purchase it from them and
That's the issue.
keep it in?
Theoretically, of course, yeah.
So their interest is keeping it preserved or conserved. So they might sell it to a person who is going to do that.
Absolutely.
But isn't that the issue we've run into?
It
It's the
could be. I mean,
building
that's why I
on-
say it might work out. You
Yeah.
could try.
Yeah, the
I don't know
issue
if
we've
Nature
run
Land
into.
Trust would go that route.
Right, the issue we've ran into is most farms would like to have homes on them, or barns and other structures that we need. And that's not what
That's what
they
hung it
will
up before,
allow
yeah.
on their property, so that's why it's still sitting vacant. Forestry won't take it because of that deed restriction, which they did rescind, but there's still that, they won't. I mean, I think maybe forestry's mission has now changed. I think maybe that 30 by 30's out the door for a while. And I don't know that it was a part of that, but that was all happening at the same time, so I would think that probably had played a big part in it. But now you have the situation to where you still have the original interested buyer, but with the restrictions that Nature Land Trust is placing, they're not allowing it to do. Now, my thought process sitting here, my wheels turning, don't get me, Tim, if I was Nature Land Trust, I'd go to Farm Bureau and I would ask them to find me a buyer that would farm it. I'd put it in their conservation privy, and then I'd back away. And that way I could answer to my people and say, we preserved it to the best of our ability, but now we're getting money back and we're gonna go look somewhere else. And it would go under Farm Bureau's conservation bank, and it would be back into farmland. And then we would be happy as an ag board because we saved a farm.
And I'm sure Farm Bureau would probably let them build a house on it.
I'm sure they would, because they understand what it takes to run a farm. And that's the difference in your conservation banks, is you have one sitting here that understands it takes a lot of things to run that farm.
But
And that's one thing a conservation easement would allow too, is a house on it. as well.
Exactly, exactly. And so that is kind of where it's at. Just saying, instead of sitting there, and I know that you said that the Robins or whoever were farming it some, but there's a difference in farming leased land and farming your land. A whole lot of difference. How much you gonna put in that fence? Not much if I'm leasing it, because I may not have it tomorrow, and it's gonna take me some time to recoup. And that's just business.
Anything else for me?
Thank you.
Thank you for
You're
coming,
welcome.
we appreciate it.
Thank y'all for letting me. I appreciate
Appreciate the
it.
explanation.
Appreciate you.
I think if you don't mind answering the quick question about if a farmer asked about getting an easement on the land, if you can give like an elevator pitch, that would probably be helpful for all of us to have that information, Mr. Donald.
Give you a little background.
From the, just as like, if we could recommend them to the Farm Bureau, what is the Farm Bureau doing, that could help?
Well, there's many land trusts operating in this state, okay? Upstate Forever being the number one that we all recognize that name. Matter of fact, we hired the land manager away from Upstate Forever. He's now our land manager, one of our land managers. Farm Bureau is unique because we decided to focus on production ag land. Upstate Forever, Congaree, most of the ones operating in this state, they concentrate on wetlands, natural resources. We focus on working ag lands. And you remember, there was a bill put in place in this state. The governor installed $10 million into it. It's called working ag lands. Has to preserve working ag lands. The easement with Farm Bureau is by your design, or the landowner's design. If you got 10 children, David, and want to build 10 houses on it, you can do that. You design that easement to suit you and your family's needs or your future needs. There are restrictions. You wouldn't be able to put a racetrack on it. You wouldn't be able to put a shopping mall on it. But there's ways of doing things with that property even outside those perimeters. I know, I'll give you an example. We had one that he's putting this place in the easement as the kids want to build an arena and start having rodeos and horse sales and all that kind of stuff. So he comes back and he says, look, I need 10 acres to put an arena on. That's okay. We'll take 10 acres over here, put with this easement, and trade it for that 10 acres you want to put that arena on. So there's ways, if it's your property and you own it, there's ways you can preserve that land and it suits you and your family's needs. We're not going to tell you what you can and can't do. We're just giving you options. And another example, I think where we're missing the boat sometimes, you mentioned that deed with restrictions on it. Now, if I was sitting on a jury, yes, that would stick to that deed because that was the previous owner's, original owner's wishes. So in my humble opinion, it should stick. But let's say Charlie here is renting 200 acres from an older couple. They have some medical issues or whatever, have a financial pinch. All right, they don't really want to sell their land, but they need some money, right? This is a tool. You can put your 200 acres in an easement. You can take the development value out of that So you collecting a little money, keep on letting Charlie farm it. You ain't gotta sell it. So it's just an option we're giving landowners. We have conserved 28 farms. We have 21 in due diligence. We have protected over 8,500 acres so far, and we've returned over $11 million to the farmers. It's a win-win for the farmers, and that's exactly who we're looking out for, is farmers and farmland. I got involved with this by researching the American Farmland Trust. That's a great tool. I don't know if everybody, go to the American Farmland Trust website. They have a mapping tool on there. You can punch South Carolina, zoom in on Oconee County, and it'll give you all the details of the farmland that's been lost here. They've been studying farmland loss for over 40 years. We had Mr. Van Pelt, Charlie, if you remember, come to our general sessions about 4 years ago, just before we started our farmland trust, and it took us like 2 years of legalities to get this thing done. So we crossed every T, dotted every I. We know how valuable it is to the families to protect their lands, and it be right. We don't ever want to get into a situation where we promise something and they come back and say, well, this ain't working out, or this is not legal. No, we got some of the best attorneys in Columbia that works for the Farmland Trust. Lee Jaziniak is the #1 man that handles our trust, and he researches everything. So our trust is unique in those kind of ways. We focus on production ag land, and we focus on the farmer and him drawing up an easement that him and his family's happy with, and the future, as they view it, can do what they desire to do with their property. Take a little money out from their development rights. You're selling your development rights is basically what you're doing.
Yeah.
Now, we used Oconee County Conservative Bank for Oconee projects to pay for some of the legal work and some of the fees. And we used the State Conservation Bank to buy that development right. But since Oconee, and I don't know what the heck Oconee's done, Duke Energy told us we intended for that money to protect farmland or protect land in general in Oconee County. What county council's trying to do up there in Oconee, we don't have a clue. There's grants for boat ramps and biking trails, and there's grants in the state for all that. You don't need to use conservation money for that. It was intended to protect land, and they made that pretty clear. And it was pretty upset that Oconee County decided just to give them their money back. And they had another $1 million they were wanting to put into it on top of the $600,000 they returned. So we just lost out on that. And I can't think of a good reason in the world we would have turned that away. But that's a moot point. But anyway, I feel like
Get that back to you?
Huh?
Is there any way we could renegotiate with them?
Well, I know 2 things that's happened. I know 2 different entities that's approached Duke Energy and said, hey, we'll take that money and we'll use it to conserve farmland in Oconee County. And that's the State Conservation Bank and Farm Bureau. It hadn't been done yet, but they've got 2 offers on the table. And we've had some people that have trust or have easements with Upstate Forever that's approached us and wanting to take it out of the Upstate Forever easement, put it in ours. We're not touching anything like that. But that's just to show that people trust Farm Bureau in protecting farmland more so than some of these other farmland or some of these other land trusts.
Well, I agree with you. Farm Bureau, having this land trust in here is a great thing. I would like to see Farm Bureau, Upstate Forever, Nature Land Trust, all of us, because, the advisory, Kim, you was on it, the task force, that's what I was trying to say.
Agriculture
The task force. You know what the #1 issue farmers was saying was problem in Oconee County is development. overdevelopment. Well, I'm just saying, if we're gonna protect farmland, we gotta use all the tools in the toolbox. Use Farm Bureau, Nature Land Trust, but also take it upon yourself if you cannot qualify for a Farm Bureau conservation easement for some reason. I'm just saying, you as an individual can do that yourself. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
It can be done.
Yes.
You can legally have your land restricted. You can.
Volunteer zoning is a tool too. So is
The zoning, I've tried to preach that. I was once I would stand up and hate zoning, and I still don't like it.
I don't either, but it's a tool.
However, I found out that you can use zoning as a tool to protect your land too, even in agriculture. I showed the zoning matrix for agriculture, 3 meetings ago? There, it says you can only build 10 houses in a development in farm zone land. And I asked the planning director at the time, I said, James, what would happen if a fancy developer from Atlanta come to Fairplay and wanted to build 100 houses and it was zoned agriculture? He said, we wouldn't give them a building permit to do it. That's
Well, what
Oconee
about that
County.
land that's not zoned? Even though
You gotta take it upon yourself to zone it.
well,
You
but
know.
that's the problem we get into. You can't convince everybody that they need to zone their land. They want to keep their options open. That's the reason most people don't put an easement on their property. They want to keep their options open. They thinking, well, maybe my kids want to sell it one day, and they want to keep that option. It's just, it's up to the individual landowner, but, as far as the easements go, like I said, it's a way that you can take a little money out of it.
Yeah.
And still protect it. In other words, there was a federal program that went around several years ago, and a lot of people got in on it. It was limited, but some people sold their land to the federal government and still farming it. And they sold it for what the property was worth, not just the difference in ag value and market value.
Yeah.
Some people got like $5,600 an acre. I know of one fellow that bought a piece of land like that. I mean, he had to go out and buy it real quick and then put it into this, but that's basically how he paid for it.
Yeah.
But, yeah, and I don't, there's a lot of things that, taxpayer money and all that good thing. So is subsidies. Subsidies, taxpayer money. And you got to look at the energy industry and multiple industries that collect subsidies. So when people want to complain about, well, that's taxpayers' money going to an individual landowner, I just say, you tell me an industry that don't have subsidies. That's taxpayer money.
Yeah.
But, when you're losing 17,000 acres a year in this little state to development, that's overdevelopment, in my opinion.
Yeah.
We had a fellow at Clemson University just tell us last week, I shared this with Farm Bureau this morning, said, students are coming to Clemson University now, we have national recognition since the success of the football team and all that stuff. And you see how it's growing there. He said that students are coming to Clemson and graduating, but instead of going home when they graduate, they just bring their family down here.
Yeah.
And that's happening in a lot of cases. I know people that's bought housing or apartments for their student, and when the students finish with it, they moved down here and moved in it. Getting out of the hustle and bustle they coming from up north or whatnot. So it's just critical right now, the influx of people we've got, and as I said before, our neighbors today is not like the neighbors we had 40 years ago. Neighbors today are so far removed from the farm, they don't have a clue what it takes on a daily operation on a farm. They don't understand what you got to do, the things you do that may not be appealing to them, but it's life for you. And so that's where you get into these pressure to sell out, because farming becomes difficult because all the regulation and DHEC and all that stuff, where it's environmental services now, but especially in the poultry business, we have to deal with all kind of regulations.
Yeah.
And so, being able, the Right to Farm Act, we've talked about maybe trying to strengthen that, but then again, you open up a can of worms, and our legislator is not the same as it was when that Right to Farm Act was passed the first time. So it may get reduced if we reintroduce it and try to strengthen it. So we're not willing to take that chance. So after working with American Farmland Trust and Mr. Van Pelt and all those guys, and those taught us a lot, we decided, well, the best thing we can do is start a farmland trust. And Kim, you talking about the Farm Bureau being a national organization, it is. And we have won awards already for our farmland trust. We received the Pinnacle Award last year, which is the highest award American Farm Bureau gives to a state. It was because of our farmland trust. And we have multiple states that's inquiring on how to get this thing started. They want to start their own farmland trust. And that's exactly what we wanted to see happen. We want to see every state farm bureau start their own farmland trust. And then maybe we can make a dent in what's happening to our farmland. But, 281,000 acres in 15 years. That was from 2001 to 2016. And the projection is by 2030, we would lose another 500,000 if current trends continue. But I would argue that the trends have accelerated. They haven't just continued, they have accelerated. So I think when this number comes back in on the next 15 years, we'll find we've lost over 500,000 acres in 15 years.
You know, tell the people looking for, tell them how many people's actually looking for land with an easement on it.
Oh, yeah. In Aiken County, I can't remember if he was a doctor or a dentist, but he was a wealthy man. That's, girl likes to show horses and whatnot. He bought a property. He was looking for a property with an easement so he could get back off the road, some privacy, build him a house and a fancy barn, and that's what it is. So the easement was attractive to that buyer. But that's not what we're doing it for. We do it to protect the land. But and that's another misinformation is once you do this, you can't sell it. Yeah, you can. You can sell that to whoever wants to buy it, but the easement stays with it. You can still sell it, but the easement goes with it.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a wonderful thing that you're talking about, it is. I'm just saying that that's a tool to save. My goal on this board is to figure out all kind of ways to save farmland, not just conservation easements. That's what I'm trying to say.
Well, like you was mentioning the deed, that's another thing. The zoning, that's a tool.
Yeah, I mean, I
think the easement is the strongest tool you can use to protect that land by far.
That's true. I'm just saying, in reality, do we have enough money to save 800 farms? I know that never happened.
Yeah,
I'm just
that
saying
never happened,
hypothetically.
just like Mr. Smith said, it's usually like 10%, maybe
Yeah.
15% on a good day of farmers that would actually do this because they want to keep their options open.
So when the 10% reaches that point, what do we do about, what other ideas to save farmland? That's where I'm coming from. The zoning, the putting your own deed restriction, make it hard for a developer to come into your community. Make it hard on them. Because like I said, the task force says that's the number one problem is overdevelopment in this county. They're coming from Atlanta, they're coming from up north. So we got to do everything, not just one or two things, we got to do everything.
I agree, and the more tools you put in that toolbox, the better we'll be.
Yeah.
We struggled for years before we finally decided to create a land trust. We struggled for years how we could participate in protecting farmland around the state.
See, here first, when we started this thing, and we had the issue here of, losing farmland.
Yeah, we saw
Development
encroachment
coming
here
in.
before the PD. We starting to pick up some acreage now. The word's got out, and we've got 4 projects right now on the books that I can think of off the top of my head that's over 800 acres in the PD region. The biggest one we got here is 550 acres in Oconee County. It's the biggest project we've done in Oconee County. And most of our projects, out of the 28 that we've closed on, most of them are in Anderson and Oconee County. That's where everybody has felt the pressure. But it's moving on
See,
down
toward
state.
Myrtle Beach and down that way, you know, we was having to preach to them to understand what we were going through in this county. Tim and I would go to meetings. And now they're seeing Myrtle Beach is coming toward Columbia. Savannah's coming, you know, Charleston's coming toward Columbia. Everybody's, when you ride down 20,
I think South Carolina is
How many?
number 2 in the nation of most people moving.
Number one based on, yes, percentage.
I knew of something like that.
Yep, number
all
one.
the prime farmland on Highway 20 going toward Myrtle Beach, it's got houses on it now.
Yeah.
They touching, the roofs are touching.
All through Lawrence County. I mean, it's just unreal, the development that we've experienced since 2020. It's unreal. You know, the world's changed. Everybody can Zoom your meetings now. You don't have to go back to the city, you don't have to have an office. You can work from home. So everybody wants to be out in the country. Can we blame them? Absolutely not. They want a little piece of paradise just like we got. And you can't blame them. But, you know, that's rural development is the number one cause of farmland loss. Now, if that development would stay in tight around the municipalities and whatnot, we wouldn't be talking about this.
Yeah.
But, you know, like I said, since everybody can work from home and all that stuff now, everybody's spreading out. The cities are losing people and the rural communities are gaining people.
So that I make sure I understand, you said that Farm Bureau protects production land. So if you had a guy.
That's our priority.
Right. So
Not
if you had a
saying
guy-
that we wouldn't protect a wetland or whatever, or a project that come in
okay,
with that.
that's what I wanted to clear
Yeah.
up, because what if somebody says, I've got 150 acres and, I just want it to be pristine. I want it to be left alone.
Well, in that case, David, we would say, you need to visit Upstate Forever.
That's what I was gonna ask you.
We hand
Go
that-
to Upstate Forever.
We hand that out, and we've done that on several projects. Somebody that's just got some hunting land or timber land or something like that, and they just want to protect it for hunting, and it's got to maybe have a river on it or something like that runs through it or whatever. We send them to other land trusts,
Okay. That's wonderful.
because we want to use our funds to protect production ag land. That's our focus.
Gotcha.
So does Farm Bureau's production ag land have a minimum?
No minimum, no minimum. I can think of one project that was 30 acres in Anderson County.
Okay. I think a lot of times that's a misconception that gets out there, and I knew y'all had said you didn't, but I just wanted to make sure.
Well, I can tell you this, it did. It did have a 100-acre minimum on it,
Oh, okay.
till they invited me on that board.
Well, I'm glad they did.
And when they did, I said, that's not gonna fly. They said, why? I said, average size farm in Oconee County is 78 acres.
Right.
So none of us would qualify. So they said, oh, well then we're gonna take that out. And they did. So they said, what would you recommend, 50 acres, 30? I said, no minimum, no minimum.
Right.
And so that's what we had, no minimum.
And you are correct on your things. I was just looking at, I have looked at farmland trust before, but Tessa and I was just looking, and not our county, thankfully, but in Lexington County in the Midlands, 29,000 acres of farmland paved over, fragmented and compromised by sprawling commercial and industrial residential development. We've lost over 280,000 acres in the Palmetto State between 2001 and 2016.
That's scary.
So it is a major problem. I think it's even a threat to national security if you think about it, because if we're not producing, who is? And where's it coming from? And just like you guys talked about today, and I'm glad that's being investigated, is the top 4 meat processors, packers, 3 or 4 and on. To me, that's a huge national security.
I agree 100%. I don't know
So-
why any thinking person would have ever allowed that to happen,
Right.
but it has.
anytime you take land out of production, me and Dave and all of us here, we've had this discussion, you got to have more fire protection, more police, more, your tax basis goes out the roof. And
Think what would have happened to that 5,200 house project fixing to happen.
Exactly.
Well, you gotta think of this, any residential, commercial, real estate, the taxes have services that have to come out of that. Ag land is pure profit. We did a study one time that showed, it compared a commercial plot versus a farm, and the county actually made more money off that farm after you take the services out required for that commercial business. They actually make more money on ag land than they do any other type, resident, industrial, or commercial.
Could I ask you some advice on something?
Yes, I can.
A farmer come to me about a month ago and said, David, is there anything, co-ops or what in the county that could help a young farmer start off, for example, young man and wife, and they want to fence in 25 acres to put a few cows in. But an auger, they'll use it one time to build a fence, and they'll sit there and weeds grow up around it. Is there a co-op that can lend out real cheap equipment that does not get used much? I know as you're an established farmer, you gather your equipment over the years, but is there anything like that that would be a good idea?
Not a co-op that I know of. I know the Cattlemen's Association has a grain drill they allow their members to use, and things like that. But as far as,
And would it be a good idea if there would be some type of maybe private or government funds to buy a grain drill, a auger, something that doesn't get used much, and you lend that out to the small farmer to help them? Because I think a lot of times, if you try to get started and you figure out the cost involved, you end up not being a farmer.
right. Well, I know that during our resolutions meetings, there's a lot of resolutions on the book for programs to help young and beginning farmers get into it with discounted interest rate on loans and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Focused on 30 and under people.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we're trying to create programs that would help the young farmer. But as far as it being something out there right now, I don't know of any. You
Would-
talk about
would
co-ops.
that be
And
a
they
good
may
idea?
be, but,
Just off the top of your head, would that be a good idea?
well, my only question, David, would be, who manages that? Who oversees it?
Well, that is one of the questions. But if let's just say that was worked out, management, if you had 10 pieces of equipment that was not used on a regular basis that a young farmer could not afford or would be financially struggling to buy all this equipment that he only used one time a year, like an auger for a fence post, just off the top of your head, would that be a good idea if it could be managed properly?
Yeah, if it could be managed properly, it'd be a great idea. Anything that help young people
Yeah.
get into farming is a good idea in my book.
Because there's some talk of maybe something like that happening through a private, of course, I won't go any further on that because it might not transpire, but I know that some people are talking about it.
We've tried to put retiring farmers with beginning farmers together. We've been trying to find that retiring farmer that would love to see his property stay in a farm, but he's older and knows his time's limited, and his kids have no interest in it.
Yeah.
So we can find that young farmer that's interested, wanting to get into farming, and team them two up. That's our goal, is to create a program like that. And the Commissioner of Ag says there's a program like that already exists. And I said, oh, yeah, I hadn't heard of it. He said, well, it has no funding. And I said, well, then it's not a program. That's just an idea.
Yeah.
But there has been somebody that's come up, and he actually has this, he claims he has this on the books, but he's, don't have funding for it yet. So maybe that's something we could do, is advocate for funding for that program that's already there at the Department of Ag. Got a commissioner race coming up this year, be a good time to bring that up.
the Farm Bureau offers, 35 and, young farmers at 35 and younger. They're actually looking into that.
Oh,
With Oconee, young farmers.
For a co-op,
Well, ways to
help get
Start
farmers into it.
farmers.
Sorry, I said the wrong thing. I thought we were talking.
Finding a mentor for that young farmer, and I think that'd be the ultimate, because we know they're out there. We know that we got the retired farmers that's out there that don't know what they're gonna do with their property, and we know for a fact we got young people that would love to be in it and just feel like they have no opportunity.
I remember when I was in FFA as a kid in high school, some farmers would go, little
Yeah.
field trips to
Yeah.
farms and stuff.
It still happens. They still have an internship, cause I usually host one, or I've hosted one over the years at my place.
It's a good avenue.
I think there's a lot of those programs, or as Tim said, the idea there, but I think a lot of times, like you said, hosting, I think that goes back to who you've got in charge.
Yeah.
And who's running that program as to how much those things get utilized and who gets what there. So, I think y'all are doing a great job with ag in the classroom. I think y'all are doing a great job with a lot of that stuff. I know a lot of that would not have happened without Farm Bureau, so thank you. I didn't tell you that this morning. Thank you for that.
Yeah, our ag in the classroom has really took off too. We're gonna have to put another one on the road. We're gonna have to take our old one and refurbish it and put it on the road, which we'll have to buy another truck, hire another instructor and another driver, so it gets expensive. We got $150,000 in that whole classroom,
Right,
and then a $70,000 truck, and then we're paying 2 people every time it goes out. So it's expensive, but that's okay. That's what we're here for, to advocate for agriculture and to teach our young people what ag's all about, where the food's coming from. That's what it's all about. There's so much demand for it. Every county except for 4 has the mobile learning lab on the books. The 4 are McCormick, Edgefield, what's the county up there next to Charlotte before you get to, in the middle of the state?
Cherokee.
Not Cherokee, over in the middle of the
Lancaster,
state.
Lancaster,
Rockham.
Sherrall.
Chester,
Chester.
Kershaw. Okay, sorry, I was going down the list.
And all these counties are underfunded. So Duke Energy stepped up and gave us a $25,000 grant to these schools that can't afford to have your mobile classroom come out. Use this money and send it. Great partnership. So yeah, we got them booked to all counties now, and we've got 80 requests we can't fill. So we need 2 more, really. But we'll take it a step at a time and get the old one refurbished, get it on the road and see where we go from there.
Good information.
Thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Any other questions?
Thank y'all for coming. We always learn when y'all speak. Y'all always enlighten us, so thank you very much for spending time with us.
Well, I got a conference call at 7:30, which is 1 minute away.
You better go.
Thank you very much.
you.
We'll see you later.
Step out, but appreciate what y'all do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith, as well.
Appreciate y'all.
Glad y'all came. Yeah, yeah, that's fine. All right, next thing is Farm Center. I approached them and asked them about meeting with us like we discussed on the December 8th meeting. They still meet on Monday nights, so there may be a conflict. It may change between now and then. They have a meeting tonight, and they're probably gonna talk about that. But they pitched, January 29th as a proposal where the boards get together and discuss some upcoming events and some projects for 2026. So, did talk to them, and, they're having a, holiday market, 12/6 and 12/7, December 6 and 7, with vendors coming in and selling
What date was that?
December 6 and December 7, Saturday and Sunday.
I was talking about getting together.
The 29th, he's mentioned the 29th of January. And I said, well, earlier in the month might be better, as early as we can in January to get started. But I don't think the 8th, I don't think they want to get with us on the 8th, or they can't.
A
So,
lot going on.
yeah.
That's a National Farm Bureau meeting and other stuff.
So that's, anything else about Farm Center? I think they're doing great things over there, and we'd like to work with them. Agricultural signage,
I would like to make a motion on that, if you don't mind.
go right ahead.
Well, the reason is Elise has been holding us together and doing a lot of jobs. And if we don't have something to vote on tonight, yes or no, I would like to table it till a further time, just for the simple fact, out of respect for Mr. Shirley, who is now holding down about 3 jobs. Elise is holding down at least 4. She's in the department by herself, and I know the day's been a long day for her, so I thank her for that. But at the same time, I don't think we need to add any more work to anybody's workload right now with signage that we can wait a few months on till.
I was going to say, I don't have a report on that. I hadn't
Okay.
talked to Mr. Shirley, understanding what's going on.
Right.
So I have no report on signage.
So I would like to make a motion to table it until a further date, and don't even know when that date might be, just because of everything that now Mr. Shirley is not only handling the entire county along with his job of handling PRT. So I would like to make the motion to table the signs until a future date,
Second.
just out of respect.
That's pretty much where I was going anyway, so any discussion? In favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. And any opposed? No. That's good. Okay. District reports, anybody have a report?
I'll go first since I'm one, I guess. Just to say that, to follow up on what y'all have given me permission to work on, I'm working on it, but there's a lot of pieces of the puzzle that need to come together. It will not happen overnight. I think we have made good progress. Even with what Senator Alexander said, they are willing to listen. That's huge for us. And then we just really need the powers that be to come on board to see what's available, and that will just take time. Our current substations, they're not power plants and producers, so we will need to reach out. But in saying that we need to reach out, I think there is a great working relationship, and I think there's some great people at the helm right now, some younger folks with Duke Energy for our area on the wholesale side and what needs to be worked out. So we will just try to make sure that we have all of our ducks in a row, everything the way it needs to be. And I don't know that we'll make everybody happy, but when we do make the presentation, we will have looked at all of our carbon capture options and what can be done, and make sure that it's clean energy that we're putting back on the grid. So, so far, everything's positive, but it's not going to be a fast process.
Thank you. Okay. 2, any other reports? District 3, we had a legislative breakfast. Farm Bureau had an excellent breakfast this morning. A lot of good information shared there today, so appreciate that. And if there's no more discussion, we can entertain a motion to,
Charlie, if he has anything in 5, 4 and 5.
I do, but I want to wait and give my report next month until I get more information together.
Okay.
What I need. Be all right.
No, I'm not trying to skip over anybody. I sense that y'all are ready to go. District 5?
Mr. Wilson would be the last one.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank y'all.